Mike Tomlin to remain as Steelers head coach. Kenny Pickett still in a shot to be QB1. Mason Rudolph, a highly sought-after free agent for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Could other veterans be back? All this and more on the latest episode of Steelers Touching Under as we talk about Mike Tomlin's final press conference for 2023 season, even though it happened in 2024. All right, let's get cracking straight into it. So Mike Tomlin does have 1 year left on his contract. He told the players, according to all reports, he would be back in 2024. The players advocated for him a lot this week. He talked in this press conference like he will definitely be back, like he's looking for an extension. I almost put a video out last night before I went to bed. I've woken up to this news. It's early in my morning. I almost put up a video last night on the channel that talks about why I think Mike Tomlin will get a 3-year extension, not a 2-year extension, a 3-year extension, because of the fact that of who they need to bring in as OC to give him more stability, to allow them to make moves across multitude of drafts to actually improve this playoff situation and not continue to be this one-hit wonder existential crisis every year if we don't make the Super Bowl, etc., etc. And also it helps with Kenny Pickett's contract if he turns out to be the guy and you hit the 5th-year option. It also gives stability to an OC and all the staff they hire in. But I didn't put that out. I wanted to see, I had a gut feeling they'll do the press conference overnight. That's what they've done. Now we can talk about some of those actual real things. But I still believe he will do a 3-year contract. Now, Mike Tomlin talked a lot about how pumped and motivated he is to be a Steelers coach. He talks about the fact he recognizes that the Steelers have to do better in the playoffs. He was actually, Brooke Pryor will ask some awful questions, but she asked a question about discipline and players, some players saying they need to be better discipline, a la Najee Harris. And Mike Tomlin said, yes, there are some certain things there. He admitted that he is looking outside for OC. Tick. He talked about discipline. Tick, as I just said. He talked about being really frustrated in not winning playoff games and being in the tournament. Tick. He talked about the fact that Pouncey didn't get a championship and that he felt that there were other Steelers players on this current roster that he wanted to win it for. He kept saying, I want to get it for this group. I want this team to get this group to get confetti. Cam Hayward, Minkah Fitzpatrick, TJ Watt, those sorts of guys. Tick. Now, you can say all the right things and you can tick all the boxes. A lot of Steelers fans out there are saying the box he doesn't tick is winning in the playoffs. Yes, he gets there. Yes, he has never had a losing season, but he doesn't win in the playoffs. I think he gets it. I actually thought a very changed Tomlin. I thought he ate all a humble pie out of the other day. I thought he came back well. A lot of people have accused me of being a Tomlin sympathizer. I'm not. I'm genuine. I think I can see people's true traits when I see it. He does genuinely want to win. And people would say, cool, you can genuinely want to win. You can be the biggest cheerleader on the sidelines. I see this a lot in the comments, particularly on Steelers videos on their actual YouTube channel. And they talk about the fact that Mike Tomlin's biggest cheerleader, but he's no good as a coach. I think there have been a lot of other issues. I also do think that the optics do look like that when he doesn't do things like fire Matt Canada in the last offseason. He paid for that heavily. Imagine this team with a better offense. I thought he showed a lot of maturity and a lot of manhood to actually sit there and say Mason has surprised us when he was asked that. That's a big deal. He's admitting where he's those, I wouldn't call them transgressions, but he's admitting where he's at fault or where the Steelers as an organization could have been at fault. But I would point out something that a very smart fan said in the Steelers press conference comments. And they said, remember, Mike Tomlin is not Bill Belichick. He's not the GM. There's certain decisions that he doesn't make that everyone assumes that he's made. And that's why there'll be a lot of discussion in this offseason. Shannon and I will be doing lots of discussion about this on the Steelers Global Perspective. That actually airs tonight live. So please check that out live. We'd love to see you in the comments and the live chat. But if you don't get a chance to see that live, then hopefully you'll see that over the weekend. But Shannon and I will be talking a lot about Khan versus Colbert, what Colbert did, what he didn't at times, because there's a big perception out there that Colbert just ticked the box every year with all these great picks. It wasn't so, and it was hidden by some Grizzly Steeler veterans that we've lost over the last few years. It's hidden by guys like DeCastro and Pouncey and Villanueva, and even, of course, Big Ben. It's hidden by, an asset like a Bud Dupree, even though how topsy-turvy his career was. It's hidden by guys like Shazier. There are a lot of different players that actually hid the challenges that they'd had in drafting and the way that they were able to bring in some vets that did actually, hit and did actually work. Moving on from Mike Tomlin, because people's opinions are starting to become very fixed either way, but I think you're going to see him in Pittsburgh for at least 3 or 4 years. Is Mason Rudolph. They definitely shouldn't bring him back, but they recognize he's a free agent. This will come down to money. it'll come down to, do you want to pay Mason $5 million a year? Are you willing to pay him more? There's probably some teams out there that are willing to pay him more, between 5 and 10. I don't think the Steelers want to do that. There's some fans that have even said, no, he had his 3 or 4 games. It's all going to crumble from there. That's a fair attitude as well. Speaking of quarterback, we'll have to see. Speaking of quarterbacks, we also heard about Kenny Pickett. Mike Tomlin says there's a legitimate chance for him to still be the QB1. They did sort of say, is he the QB1 right now? He technically said yes. I think he was avoiding heat on everyone involved. But he said it is a huge year. He said it is a massive year. Kenny and I spoke about that this morning in exit press conference. He talked about the fact that it is a huge year for Kenny Pickett. He needs to get it right. They talked about bringing in competition. He's not necessarily convinced it's a veteran. They might draft a guy late in the draft, see if they can develop that guy as well. I think a lot of what they do in the draft at quarterback will depend on whether they bring back Rudolph. If they feel confident in Rudolph and Kenny, then they're less likely to spend a draft pick. But they're not going to waste cap in a tight cap year. We did a show yesterday on how they could save $40 million getting rid of 5 to 6 guys that probably shouldn't be on the roster in 2024 based on what we saw in 2023 and in conjunction with their cap number. You can go back and check that out. But with the tightness of the cap, it probably makes less sense to be spending money on quarterback because of how much that costs, depending on the quality of that quarterback, and better to probably draft a guy. And so maybe you're drafting higher if they can't bring back Mason Rudolph and you're legitimately going down that QB competition route. Worst case, you end up with another serviceable backup that's cheap. That's very helpful in this league from a salary cap perspective. He talked about the guys like Pat Freiermuth coming along. I mean, we know Pat Freiermuth is great and now becoming a savvy veteran, but he talked about how much Pat Freiermuth impressed him. He talked about Benton and the future that Benton has. Benton has been an absolute steal in this draft. He talked a lot about the young guys in Herbie in that way as well. He more referenced him rather than pulled him out specifically, but he did pull out at Benton. He also talked a lot about the fact that the Steelers go through the draft process so carefully and so diligently that helps them with free agency. We've sort of heard that narrative the last 2 years, but he talked about things. He sat there for an hour after Houston's pro day and talked with Landon Roberts. They talked a lot with Allen Robinson when he was coming out of Penn State. These guys are guys that have made a difference on the roster this year. Now, I've said Allen Robinson probably doesn't come back in 2024 at his current cap number. You can save $10 million by cutting him. You cut him, you bring him back. I think that'd be awesome. Or work out even a deal, a third of that would be good. But you only hit a $1.4 million cap hit, dead cap hit from that as well. So probably not back. But the example of the story is about how they go about the draft. And I think you'll see that not just in how they continue the draft process this year, but how they approach free agency. So in free agency, you want to look at players that the Steelers maybe known to have had a relationship before. That will be really key in terms of how they go about free agency, which of course comes before the draft. He did talk about, obviously we'll go back to that as well, talked about bringing someone outside, talked about looking at all coaching staff positions. I'm hopeful that there'll be some changes on the defensive coaching staff as well. Probably doesn't make sense to get rid of Terrell Austin as much as I do think he could be moved on. Ray Fittipaldo can criticize anything about Mike T he likes, but then he doesn't criticize Terrell Austin. I don't get it. But that's just a gripe that I have. I listened to him yesterday and refuse to listen to him ever again after some of the stuff he says. But Terrell Austin does have people on his staff that I think, could be improved. I also think that, if I had a choice between keeping Grady Brown or keeping Terrell Austin and having to promote Grady Brown, I'd be doing that. I think the cornerbacks coach is better than Terrell Austin. I just do. That's just my opinion. I'm sure people will tell me differently in the comment section, but that is my opinion on it. But otherwise, in terms of the Mike Tomlin press conference, there's a lot of things we don't have answers to right now because this season has hit an abrupt halt. He called it a screeching halt. It's an awkward time. It really is. It's a weird, we knew very much the Steelers didn't make the playoffs. I was ready to start the off-season content, the off-season narratives, get into draft profiles, which will be happening over the next week or so. Really ready for that. And then you get to the playoff game and you prep for it and you're like, cool. And then you start thinking about what's all the content coming, for example, across the channel for the next 3 or 4 weeks. What if they make a run to the Super Bowl? All those different things. And then suddenly, boom, it's not, and you're back to that. And for the Steelers, that's a microcosm of the challenge that they have, just from us having a YouTube channel. But for them, it's a whole different ballgame. It's contracts, it's players, it's who's back, who's not, who am I drafting, who am I not, all those different things. Very different perspective for that team. There's the veterans, who's come back, who's not. Mike Tomlin's talked about they do the exit interviews not just to find out how things are going, what do they improve for next year. That's the whole plan. That's what a lot of exit interviews when you exit companies for. But these exit interviews is like we're trying to fine tune things, mentioning things like nutrition and strength and conditioning, all these sorts of things. This team is on the path to getting better. They made the playoffs and I can't reiterate this enough. This was a 10-7 team who at the start of the year people said would be lucky to go 7-10, would be lucky to be in the playoffs. They are in the playoffs. They took the Bills, who even the Bills surprised me in how well they played, to be honest. I didn't think they'd play that well, even at home. They firmly should be in the AFC Championship game, and they firmly, I believe, probably are the AFC contender in the Super Bowl. I do think the Texans could shock the Ravens, and then the Texans are a team that are on some serious momentum. But history is against a rookie quarterback and CJ Stroud doing it all. But going back to that, the Bills, they did beat the Steelers quite handsomely toward the death there. We made an interception in the end zone. That doesn't get made. That could have been a touchdown, at least field goal. That brings you back closer. We didn't even try and throw it that well until the second half. The run game, I think they look back and could have done some things differently. I think Miles Jack, wrong place, wrong time on two of those things, or not capable, not the right person in the right place at the right time. But one of those plays, they probably could have schemed that better, and that's the difference maker as well. This team wasn't so far off the pace that they shouldn't have been in the playoffs. They deserve to be in the playoffs. But most Steel fans need to recognize that this was a 7-10 team for all intents and purposes, according to everyone, with a heap of stack of injuries. And then they brought in a heap of veterans and guys off the couch, and they still got there. So losing this year in what I would have said was a rebuild, maybe even a refresh, if you want to be like less intense about it, that's a pretty good result. There are teams that don't do that. They do that once every decade, every 20 years. You're seeing that now. And with some of the teams that are still in the playoffs. But they do have to do better. So now next year is about retooling. How well have you retooled to put yourself in the chance for a contender? Because realistically, the chances of contending next year, it's gonna be harder. But they surprised us this year. Their goal next year should be AFC Championship game, win 2 playoff games. They can do that, then they put themselves in Super Bowl contention. They really, really will, either next year or the year ahead. But that's got to be their goal. They have to win 2 playoff games. They have to be playoff ready. And I do think some of that's snap management. Mark and I talked about that when we were doing stuff still with Behind the Steel Curtain, or Steel Curtain Network now. We talked about snap management in a 17-game season. I think snap management's going to be huge next year with Hayward and TJ Watt. Absolutely huge. And that's why the benefit of finding Herbig now is so good. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on, if you've heard the press conference, let me know your thoughts based on what my comments were. Do you can then bring back Mike Tomlin? I know it's a very divisive thing. If so, for how long? What do you need to see out of him to feel more faithful in him, whether you're a supporter of him or you're not? And who's the rookie that impressed you the most? I'm going to do some deep dives on those guys after at the end in the next few weeks as well. But I'd love to know which rookie you want me to kick off with first, because been a pretty impressive year for most of the Steelers rookies. As always, go Steelers.